Good morning or afternoon, everyone, as I know we're all in different places around the world. And along with Professor Theodore Georgopoulos, I would like to welcome you to the third Transatlantic Symposium on Wine Law and Policy. Today, we're going to talk about sustainability and the wine sector, marketplace opportunities and challenges. I want to just let you know, by way of housekeeping, if you would like to chat, communicate to the panelists and other attendees, please use the chat function. To ask a question of one of the panelists, use the Q&A function, please. And we do encourage you to ask questions. It'll make for a much more interesting panel if you are all engaged. This webinar will be recorded, and there will be copies of the presentations available via download shortly after this webinar concludes. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we're going to be focusing on, I think, a very interesting and highly watched area, which is sustainability on an international level in the wine industry. It is very difficult to talk about sustainability when there are so many different definitions, different criteria of sustainability programs around the world, as well as different needs and demands, both from public monopolies that are alcohol retailers, as well as private retailers. So today we're going to try to discuss the best we can all of the successes, the tensions, and the goals that are attendant to this very interesting area. And we know that with respect to opportunities, we have many successes to share to both consumers and retailers about all the great work that's being done in the wine growing regions of the world. So those are the great successes and opportunities that we have. But we also have a myriad of different certification programs. And so consumers often get confused about which certification programs and what they mean. What are they and what they mean, and whether all of them are actually sound. Another challenge that we have is that, as I said, private retailers and public retailers are looking at sustainability from different angles, and they're asking suppliers for different things. They're asking them for different accountability levels and different sort of proofs of concept in terms of that a sustainability program is actually meeting rigorous criteria. So we are going to talk today with a very, very highly acclaimed group today. The panel that we have is actually perfect for this discussion. First, I'm going to introduce Laura Gelezuina. She is the Deputy Head Secretariat of FIVS, and FIVS is a non-governmental international federation that works for general sustainability of the global alcohol beverage sector. She's going to tell you a lot more about FIVS and how FIVS could be, and it is now and could be even more so, a forum for great consensus generation around sustainability programs globally. Then we have Professor of Law at the University of Reims, Theodore Georgopoulos. He is also a counsel to the Casalonga law firm in Paris. We've got Allison Jordan. Allison is the Vice President of Environmental Affairs for Wine Institute, and she's the Executive Director of the award-winning California Sustainable Alliance for Wine Growing, which promotes environmental and social responsibility, obviously, and sustainability. And we're very fortunate today to have Mr. George Solais. He'll tell you more about himself, but I want to tell you just a little bit to begin with. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. He's in Ontario, Canada, and this is a government agency that is the world's largest buyer, retailer, and wholesaler of alcohol. And he's going to give us his perspective on sustainability, standards, goals, and direction that LCBO is working on now. So with that, Laura, I'm going to turn over the screen to you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Tracy. Let me just share my screen. And perfect. Can everyone see my screen? Great. Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you for the introduction, Tracy. And today what I'd like to talk to you about is what FIVS has been doing in the area of sustainability from an international and wine producers perspective. I'll cover two main aspects. The first one being the FIVS Global Wine Sustainability Principles, and secondly, our sustainability benchmark. But before, maybe just a few words about what FIVS is and what we do, although Tracy already alluded to that. So we are a global trade federation representing mainly the wine sector, created in 1951 and currently headquartered in Paris. Our membership is composed of producers, exporters, importers, and trade associations, just to name a few examples. We have members in Europe, Asia, North and South America, Africa, and Australasia. Currently, our membership represents around 75% of wine traded globally. So that's who we are. And what do we do? Well, if I had to resume it in one phrase, I would say our primary objective is to work for the overall sustainability of the global alcohol beverage sector. And we do this by gathering and disseminating significant developments on sustainability and by advocating consensus positions to international or intergovernmental organizations, as well as governments, including WHO, WTO, the OIV, or Codex Alimentarius. In 2017, we actually reorganized all our activities around the triple bottom line of sustainability to reflect the increasing need to address not only economic issues that we typically dealt with in the past as a trade association, such as tariff and non-tariff barriers, labeling, taxation, but also environmental and social issues, which have had an increasing impact on things like market access and trade for the wine sector. So this brings me to my first point, the FIVS Global Wine Sustainability Principles. What are they? Well, they actually date back to 2006, when we published a first set of principles, back then called the Global Wine Sustainability Producers Environmental Sustainability Principles. And it was the first international framework for environmental sustainability in the wine sector. And we had three main goals. We wanted to offer a unifying set of environmental sustainability principles. We wanted to help FIVS members, so producers mainly, implement them via appropriate programs, and also recognize the need for flexibility to address significant environmental issues based on local circumstances and priorities. Our audience was really wine growers and winemakers to help them, on their sustainability journey. And already back then, you recognize, I would say, two very major issues that will reappear. One was the need to align sustainable objectives at a global level for the wine industry. And second of all, the fact that the number and varied nature of environmental strategies results from the special character of the wine sector's diverse production regions. And this I'll get back to a little bit more in detail later. Fast forward to 2020 to 2023, and we actually just updated our principles. And it's a pretty big update. And why did we decide to do this? Well, first of all, today, if you talk about sustainability, you really have to include the three pillars, not just environmental, which was our initial main focus, but also social, economic. And we wanted to bring everything back under the same umbrella. And in particular, social aspects, which have become a major preoccupation for the industry, as we can see in the rise of various social frameworks such as ESG, environmental, social, and governance, or CSR, corporate social responsibility, different ISO standards like 26,000, focusing on social aspects. And this has also been a big subject of a discussion with the retailers. We also wanted to align the principles with the UN SDGs, which has its own version of triple bottom line, people, planet, prosperity. And why is this important? Because for us, it's a universal language, which allows all actors in the industry to discuss their sustainable practices and monitor their achievements. It really makes it more accessible to a wider audience. And finally, I would say the principles now, the audience has slightly changed. we're not so much looking to help wine growers and winemakers, tackle sustainability, but rather help them communicate about sustainability with the retailers, consumers, and international organizations. So concretely, what do they say? Well, first of all, at FIVS, with our members from all around the world, we managed to, come to the adoption of a definition of sustainable wine growing and winemaking. You can see it on the screen. I won't read it, but just highlight the fact that it's really a holistic approach that takes into account the environment, society, and economic viability. We have 7 high-level principles, which again, you can see on the screen. So triple bottom line, that's, pretty self-explanatory. Evaluation and continuous improvement. And this really is about audits, saying, hey, if you're adopting, a sustainability program or scheme, there should be something about assessment, whether it's internal, external audits to measure progress. Education and outreach. So this is about, having workshops or outreach, community outreach, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Partnerships with stakeholders. Is another important one, whether, you're working with retailers, natural resource managers, labor relation experts. Next, and these are the next 3 are actually new principles we included, which are science-based approach. We think it's important in today's world, to really be using a set of measurable science-based practices. Governance, planning, and reporting. This is to help, producers, winemakers with accountability and transparency. And finally, communication, which allows you to reinforce the benefits of sustainability, potentially enhance market access, and also deter greenwashing practices. So these principles, they are now housed in a new website. It's called globalsustainablewine.com. And the idea was really to have something accessible to all. This is not just about being a FIVS initiative. We really wanted this to be about the sector's overall sustainability. And so we also included an additional section where we present 34 programs, sustainability programs from around the world, not just our members, but also just programs, for the wine sector, which really we find appropriate and that cover sustainability. And so this just general picture is what our principles are about. Now, the next step is the FIVS benchmark. And what do I mean by benchmark? Well, in 2006, when we came out with the first version of principles, we were quite happy and we thought, great, we have a framework. But today, as an industry, we felt that we needed to go one step further and actually try and really show how these different programs and standards all kind of implement the FIVS principles. And why is that? Because really the operating environment has really changed in the past 15 years. So one thing we'll be talking about today, the proliferation of sustainability standards. Just for wine, there's over 70 standards or programs or schemes. And on the one hand, that shows the importance of sustainability. But on the other hand, it creates confusion also for external audiences. Which one is good? Which one isn't? Are they all reliable? There's also greater scrutiny and interest from consumers and retailers. They want to know what they are drinking and how it was produced. And ironically, the fact that we have so many standards today makes it somewhat more confusing for consumers, who aren't experts in wine sustainability. Finally, a last important point to raise is the fact that we've been seeing attempts to create a unique international standard for wine or scheme. Just recently, actually, Codex Alimentarius, which is a standard-setting organization linked with WHO, has initiated a new work stream on sustainability labeling, and this has had us think, as producers at the international level, we thought, well, what do we do when it comes to this? And so we thought, instead of trying to create something new, why don't we start by showing what all existing standards actually have in common? Now, easier said than done, of course, because one of the reasons why there are so many standards out there is because wine is really intrinsically linked to local conditions, whether it's terroir, climate, soil. These issues really differ where you are, and it can be within a country or between varying countries. An issue like water management, you're not going to have the same issues whether you're in California, France, Chile, or New Zealand. Social aspects, things like migrant workers, you definitely won't have the same issues if you're, talking about Italy or New Zealand, which is an island. So that's really why we're facing so many different standards around the world. And these standards also vary, their scope of application geographically, whether they're regional, national, international. Some are not necessarily wine specific, like Salmon Safe in the United States. Some focus on just economic issues, environmental issues, or social. Some will look at the winery, others at the vineyard. Some programs are 30 pages, others go 700 pages. So there's really a large variety of programs out there. And so how do we as FIVs, so how do we approach this difficulty? Well, our benchmark is based basically on the FIVs principles, and it's meant to be top level. We're looking at the what, not the how. So we're not trying to look at the minute details. We want to make sure that all these programs cover, the essential points. And so you can see on screen a few examples. Environmental sustainability, we have 23 factors that we consider quite important, but we distinguish between wineries and vineyards. Social sustainability, we have 17 different factors. And here again, we distinguish between what's covered by a standard and what's covered by government regulations. Another issue I think we'll be discussing today, whether, as a producer, can you rely on your local laws or on regulations when it comes to social sustainability, like workers' rights, or do you have to have a program that specifically covers this? And of course, you have other factors like auditing, partnerships, communication, certification claims. And this process, it's really a process that FIVs has embarked on in the past year. And as you can see, we're past step one. We've updated our principles. Step two, prepare the benchmark. We're currently at step three. We're asking our members to fill out the benchmark for their program, their sustainability programs. And then we're going to analyze all the results, work with our members to address any existing gaps. If we find some, we will publish the findings on the Global Sustainable Wine website, and then we will use this to communicate with retailers. And really, what do we hope to achieve? Well, what we're really trying to do is we want to present a unified vision of sustainability for the international wine industry. And in order to do so, we have to demonstrate that existing standards, comply with, or meet the minimum standards set by the FIV's Global Wine Sustainable Principles. Instead of creating a new standard, we want to show what all these existing programs have in common. This would allow us to avoid further proliferation and duplication of standards, which on our end, we think that creates confusion and also adds more work, whether it's on the producer side, on the retailer side. We also, as producers, want to control the narrative around sustainability in the wine sector and help increase transparency, which would also improve our engagement with retailers. And finally, last thing, just as a closing remark, is, why not maybe set the stepping stones for mutual recognition in the future? And by that, I mean, perhaps one day we could reach a point where one sustainability standard in one country is recognized in the other country. It's a very long process. I'm not sure we can do it, but I think it's worth reflecting upon it. I know other groups are addressing this issue, and perhaps FIVs can really, be this forum, as Tracy mentioned, where we can tackle these issues at the international level to improve, sustainability for the wine sector. And with this, I will hand the floor back to Tracy.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was very informative and very important because it is key to have a forum where we can all get together, discuss common benchmarks, make sure the criteria is rigorous, and then obviously have that dialogue with retailers, because that's key for us to be able to get to alignment there. One question for you is, I know you probably have a good number of countries and members right now working with you in the social sustainability or the sustainability working group. But in order to achieve the outcomes, it seems that you're going to have to really be able to pull in and grab the attention of many programs around the world. What is the plan to sort of bring everybody in as much as possible so that you have a big tent and a good sampling of countries with different programs?
Great question. So already, I think we're at a good starting point because thanks to our membership, we already cover, all the major wine producing regions. So I think what we want to, first step is work with our members and, have them fill out the benchmark. We'll be cross-referencing the benchmark, to make sure that, we're all aligned and have the same understanding of what, the questions and the answers. And I think at first we kind of really want to create a strong voice within FIS, within our existing members. And once we're really all aligned and we have that, position, then we kind of want to start opening up the gates and reaching out, to others to kind of have them join us. We're all about being inclusive. The idea is not to exclude people. That's not the nature of, of a trade federation. It's really about including others. But I think in order to do that, first we need to come out with a strong proposition, a strong statement. And I think that by itself will allow others to join us and to really understand the added value of having a common voice for the wine sector at the international level.
Well, it sounds like you're well underway. Are there any other questions? Are there any questions, Professor Georgopoulos or anyone who's listening in who would like to ask Laura a question at this moment?
There are many questions. Thank you very much, Tracy. But I would prefer asking the question. I have a question for Laura, but it is also probably interesting to get answers from the other panelists. So I'll just maybe wait and skip to. Let's wait after the end of these presentations, if that's okay for you.
Yes. We're moving now to Allison Jordan. Allison, thank you so much for being a part of this, and over to you.
It's so great to be with you. Thank you so much, Tracy and Theo, and good morning and good afternoon. I am going to be offering a US or a California in particular perspective on sustainability, and Laura set a great framework for us to have this discussion because a lot of what we're doing fits really well within that international context. So I'll talk about that a little bit at first, and then talk about some of the efforts underway in the United States. Here in California specifically, I'll go into some details about how you really take the definition and principles and put it into action. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the marketplace challenges and opportunities, which I think there are many. And again, Laura already did a great job of setting the framework for that discussion. So first, in the international context, Wine Institute, one of the parents of our sustainability program, is very active in FIVs. And so that common definition of principles have been very important. And you see here some of the other programs. I didn't include the logos of all 70, but some of the programs that are most similar to ours and that we've worked really closely with on understanding lessons learned and best management practices that we could all be promoting. And again, really bringing those principles and definition to life. I think that there's a real opportunity given the interest and the number of programs that are in place around the world for wine to really be the sustainable beverage of choice. There's a lot of conversation about the role of wine relative to beer and spirits, and I think this is something that makes wine really unique. And another piece of the international picture that I think really is important because it does provide that common framework or set of issues that we can all relate to. And again, the FIVS principles really do tie directly into the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So now a bit about what's happening on the ground here in the United States. You'll recognize this definition because it is very much aligned with the FIV's definition and principles. We work together with our partners in New York, Oregon, and Washington. Together, we represent 95% of all US wine production to make sure that we were talking about sustainability in the same way. So already there were a number of educational programs around the US and more certification programs under development. So we felt it was important for us to really be singing from the same song sheet. And so we put together this definition, principles, and a website that also includes information about all of the relevant certification programs, which is sustainablewinegrowing.us. And to Laura's point, while there is that shared definition, sustainability just by its very nature is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And educational and certification programs really need to reflect that regional diversity. If you think about it, New York's weather and the fact that they get rain year-round or snow, they're very, very different in terms of their pest pressures and their water availability than a state like California, which even in and of itself has such diverse wine regions in such a large state. We also recognize that there are a number of issues that all sustainability programs need to address in some way or another. And you can see them here. Again, I won't read them, but I think everyone can think about natural resources protection and wildlife habitat protection, but really importantly, also thinking about the social aspects of sustainability. I think that's one of the things that sets it apart from something like organic, where all organic, biodynamic, and sustainable, and even regenerative approaches all address things like soil health and integrated pest management. Of course, there are some really strict requirements around crop protection materials and organic, but sustainability is this very comprehensive set of issues. And it's really important to recognize the social pillar, some of the principles that Laura already mentioned, and then also thinking about your supply chain, everything that you're bringing into the vineyard and winery and your vendors. So turning to California, we've been working on sustainability now for 3 decades and just recently put together this website that really highlights a lot of the accomplishments and milestones that happen with all of our programs. So the California Sustainable Winegrowing Alliance and our educational and certification programs were founded by Wine Institute and COG over 20 years ago, but there was a lot of work happening around the state in wine regions like Sonoma, Napa, Lodi, the Central Coast. And so we were able to really draw on the work that they had already undertaken. And this is really capturing all of that great work that goes back decades now. I've mentioned these organizations, but just to explain it a little bit more, the nonprofit that I manage is the California Sustainable Winegrowing Alliance. And it is really all around promoting, encouraging the adoption of sustainable wine growing practices and communicating California wine's leadership through education, outreach, certification, and partnerships. And it really started with the development of the California Code of Sustainable Winegrowing that was first put together by Wine Institute and the California Association of Wine Grape Growers. Together, those organizations represent a vast majority of California wine grape acreage and case production. And they created this nonprofit, the California Sustainable Winegrowing Alliance. But the Alliance is much bigger. It includes all of the regional associations. We have a lot of input from various stakeholders, including government agencies, academic institutions, environmental and community groups, and all of them have been very instrumental in the development of the code and our certification program, and in our ongoing education and outreach. So you'll see here our code that, again, was first published in 2002. We're now in the 4th edition, so it's something that we're updating regularly with new understanding about best management practices or more rigorous, and it seems like increasingly stringent laws and regulations, both at the state and federal level. And so we're always keeping this information up to date, but it's a really great tool for growers who simply want to understand sustainable wine growing. What does it mean on the ground? What is the blueprint for them to continuously improve? But it also serves as the basis of our certification program, which I'll touch on. We've also in 2012 added metrics, so free tools and calculators that wineries and vineyards in the state can use to measure and track performance on things like energy and water use efficiency, greenhouse gas intensity, and their applied nitrogen in vineyards. And these are also now required for certification. One of the things that I think is really critical to think about when we talk about all of the different programs that exist is, again, there are those regional differences, but there's also really the handholding and support and education that's needed on the ground. And so far, we've had over 600 workshops for thousands of participants all over the state, addressing all kinds of sustainability topics and connecting them with cost share and incentive opportunities, or with experts that can help them implement sustainable practices on the ground. And we also have put together hundreds of handouts and educational materials, videos, lots of different templates that people can use to track and make improvements on the ground. And then quickly turning to our requirements for certification. In our case, and I think it is very much the case for many, if not all of the sustainability programs, that there are these annual independent verification. To Laura's point, there's some differences in the time periods or in the type of auditors, but in our case, it's an annual third-party audit, and they're verifying that the certified vineyard and/or winery is adopting sustainable practices. Certain things are required. They have to be meeting an overall minimum score threshold, so really ensuring that they're meeting that comprehensive triple bottom line of sustainability. As I mentioned, they have to be measuring and tracking performance based on the metrics. And we also have added restrictions on crop protection materials that are based on our federal and state restricted materials lists. So certain things that they can't use, or that they need to pause and think about alternatives and risk mitigation measures that they're taking to make sure that they're applying it in a safe way. And then finally, they have to be making improvements year after year. So not only are they meeting these stringent requirements, but they have to be thinking about their operation, because again, sustainability is local, and where they have the biggest impact or what their priorities are and what they need to be doing in terms of taking action and making those improvements every year. And an auditor is verifying all of those things. We've had great participation since we've launched certification back in 2010. First for vineyards and wineries, and then we added the option for wine certification so that claims could be made on wine labels. And as you can see, we now have almost 40% of our acreage certified to our program. Another 22% is certified to one of the other California programs, Napa Green, certified, Low Rye Rules, and others. And we also have 80% of California wine being made in a certified sustainable winery. And then finally, with that new logo that you see on the right, it's both the winery has to be certified and 85% or more of the grapes have to be California wine grapes made in a or grown in a certified vineyard. And we now have 18 million cases that are bearing that logo. One of the things that as you get closer to product certification that's really important is this idea that you're adhering to international standards. And Laura mentioned ISO, there's also the ISEAL Alliance, and SAI is another one, but basically we've gone through oversight evaluations and benchmarking to make sure that we're truly adhering to those international standards and meeting marketplace expectations. And then the other piece that we've added, as we've had now these thousands of vineyards, wineries, and wines that are involved, we created a new website specifically for trade and consumers. It's californiasustainablewine.com. And you can basically search for certified vineyards, wineries, wines, and learn more about what certification means. And there's even a map if you're visiting California where you can see which certified wineries also offer tastings and visits. So just quickly, I will touch on marketplace implications. And we've done some trade and consumer research, and this is just some of the highlights, but all of it is available on our website or on Wine Institute's website. And I'm happy to share the link to it as well. But consumers are indeed very interested. And we've done some work with Wine Intelligence that shows that this really across the board in key international markets as well. But in the US, 74% of wine drinkers indicated that they would consider sustainability as a purchasing criteria in the future. And there was even an indication, especially amongst younger generations, that of wine drinking age, of course, that 9/10 of them were willing to pay more for a certified sustainable wine. And then finally, there is this interest in being able to find that information easily. And so that's where sustainable certification can really come in handy, because it improves that transparency and reassurance when they see it, whether it's on a website, on a sign, or on the wine label. In terms of trade, again, this is something that is of growing interest. Of course, they're also considering the variety and the producer and the region, et cetera, the price point. But 82% indicated that they either frequently or occasionally consider sustainability when making wine purchases. And they think that it is a useful selling feature or attribute in wine because their consumers are interested. And that also it's often a tiebreaker. So if they're looking at two identical wines, 71% said that they would purchase one that's sustainably produced over one that is not. So increasingly important for our trade and consumer audiences. And we know that there are lots of implications. So there's clearly opportunities for us to talk about sustainability, for wineries to really seek that certification and or find credible ways to talk about what they're doing on the ground. But we also, to Laura's point, are seeing a proliferation of different sustainability initiatives by our retailer partners, which can be really helpful, but can also sometimes cause a lot of extra work for wineries that maybe are already getting certified, but they're filling out 20 different questionnaires, asking similar questions. And so something that we're trying to address now. And then also farm to fork, just to mention that some of the policy implications of how that plays out in the marketplace are something that we're watching carefully, as there are really specific targets being set for agricultural producers, even those that are importing into the EU. And I think that Theo will provide some more background on that. And so I'll end by saying that we're really trying to do a better job, not only talking to our audience, a really important audience of the industry, which we've done for the past 30 years, where we're talking to growers and vintners and regional groups, but we're also really trying to get the messages across to our trade and consumer partners. And talking about wines on a mission is a way to include not only sustainable and all of the different programs, but also organic, biodynamic, and regenerative agriculture, all important approaches, and really trying to simplify our messages and bring it to life through some of the visuals that you see here. This was our first attempt at this at Eureka in London. And Eureka is going to be going to Canada very soon. So kind of an exciting development, and hopefully will be useful for everyone who's trying to more readily communicate about sustainability. And so I will end there.
Thank you, Allison. And we've got two questions in the Q&A. I'm going to ask one now and one later because it's more of a global question. I'll save that for later after all the speakers go. But I wanted to ask a quick question, which is, Laura and Allison, do you think that tax incentives would be a good idea to greater incentivize the wine sector to sort of move along more quickly in finding sustainable solutions?
I'm happy to go first. I definitely think that tax incentives can help, especially when costs are involved in adopting sustainable practices or technologies. And I can think of a few examples that are readily available, which is for solar and electric vehicles. Even for energy efficiency measures, there are rebates, another example of sort of those ways to get some funding that can really help wine growers implement sustainable practices on the ground. And there's already been some of those within California's incentive infrastructure, but there are also tax incentives expected to come from the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed recently in the US government. So I do think that they can be very helpful, and hope that they will continue.
I would agree with Allison, exactly what she said about the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a big one there. That's, going to provide a lot of funding for that. And I think that's great. Same thing in the EU, the EU Green Deal. I believe the EU has put away 1 trillion euros for investment, for direct grants and soft loans to decarbonize industries. So that I think is definitely going to have an effect. You have also research R&D tax credits. And I think maybe the only one thing is to make sure that these these tax incentives are made accessible, especially to smaller wineries and wine growers who are, I think, the ones who have the hardest time because a lot of the wine industry is fragmented. It's small wineries, and so it's to make sure that they have access to these, and that's not too complicated the process. But absolutely, I think it's a good way of moving this forward because it implies costs, and that's a great way to incentivize.
Thank you both. And now I'm going to ask one of the audience questions, and I think this is really more for Allison. How do you track violations of the code? And when you find them, is there a database of compliance violations so people can kind of see where wineries have gone wrong? Or how do you actually handle when people are below code, and how is that corrected or handled?
So the third-party verification process is really key to that. So we have about 20 auditors that are accredited to go out and do the verification on the ground. They do it annually, years 1, and then every 3 years after it's on site, and then they can do a desk audit in years 2 and 3. And basically they are ensuring that the prerequisites are being met, that the individual vineyards and wineries are scoring themselves accurately, and there is a time for them to adjust their scores. So if an interesting thing is often people score themselves lower than they should, than the reverse. But basically they have to make some of those corrections in order to maintain certification. But if they're not meeting the requirements, they basically on an annual basis are checked and then are no longer certified. So they can have certification revoked. They have to get it renewed on an annual basis.
Thank you, Allison. And now I'm happy to turn over the microphone to Professor Georgopoulos. So we're going to travel from California back to the EU right now. And Theo Georgopoulos is going to talk to us about some of the sustainability issues that are arising in the EU right now. And also, very interestingly, some of the legal issues that have arisen, in particular with some of the public monopolies who are retailers in alcoholic beverages. Thank you, Theo.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm very happy to be here and to organize together with you the 3rd Transatlantic Symposium. It all started in full COVID, and now we are already in the third symposium. So many thanks also for allowing me to work to discuss on this. So I guess you can see my my screen. Now let me move fast on the first issue by telling the following. It is very difficult to discuss the matter of sustainability from an EU perspective, since we have 27 different member states, and so it is most of the times each one of them having its own objectives and priorities, and even from a social and economic point of view, there are very important differences. However, the good news is that from the EU perspective, I'm talking about the internal market perspective, we can have, let's say, a common level where we can discuss about sustainability from an EU perspective, because in fact, sustainability has become progressively a European matter in terms of common rules, common standards for all member states, even though, as we will see, the reactions are not necessarily the same, and we don't go all through the same path towards being more sustainable when it comes to the wine sector. So if I try to regroup to discuss about the major claims related to sustainability from an EU perspective, I wouldn't say, I would say that to some extent it is not very original, but it still has to some extent the footprint of the specificities of the European integration. First, sustainability has become a part of the EU agenda on the wine sector. Then it is true that the big issue from the European perspective is to find ways to be sustainable while fighting against distortions to competition. I'll get back to this, and this will also allow me to give some elements to the answer to the question about tax incentives. And also, of course, the question is how you are really sustainable while informing and protecting the consumer. Now, if we try to find what are the different patterns, the different methods in order to go to ensure more sustainability for the wine sector, social, economic, or environmental sustainability, there are different ways. The first one is you just fix the benchmark, you just fix the purpose, and then you try either to convince or you wait for the operators the business operators to be sustainable or to move towards that direction. In fact, it is not as romantic as it may seem because it works. It may work, as Allison said earlier, and it's the same thing from a European perspective. The consumer is looking for more and more sustainable wines. It has become not just a marketing issue, but it has become to some extent a part of the identity of wine products. Following consuming trends, trying to present the wines as sustainable as part of the identity of the wine. And of course, you have incentives by public authorities like tax relief or grants, specific financial schemes, or other advantages, like, for instance, getting priority when it comes to asking for authorizations for new plantings for vineyards. Then there is also the possibility to make sustainability as part of the collective identity of a group of producers, especially when it comes to geographic indications. And last but not least, and here is where things are become more rigid and to some extent, maybe one might say more efficient, we will see that, by imposing sustainability as, let's say, as a threshold, as a standard, as an objective that must be respected through binding horizontal rules. Now, just like in the US, there is a lot of different schemes, private schemes or public schemes, when it comes to sustainability. By the way, as you said, as the previous speaker said, when it comes to sustainability, we mean different things, different levels, social, environmental, economic, but also sustainability can be apprehended either as a whole or in part, meaning being sustainable for this or for that, which is a good thing, one might say, because we go step by step. But at the same time, if we are a little bit more pessimistic or critical, one might say that, in fact, this is also subject to controversy. You get too many different schemes, too many different certifications, too many different signs, logos, too many different, let's say, communication being sustainable, and as a result, you may get pollution in terms of information and also distortions to competition. Talking about tax incentives, as we were discussing earlier, tax incentives may be a solution, provided, however, that the tax incentives are really interesting on the one hand, if you grant some kind of tax credit, but at the same time that it will really help a winery become sustainable rather than trying to find tricky ways to get the tax credit while becoming sustainable in part and finding other ways in order to be far from the real objective. So there is in the public sphere in Europe, there is a lot of controversy about, not about sustainability as such, but about various schemes, private or public schemes, which might be easy to obtain, which might be misleading for the consumer, which might be discriminatory, source of distortion, or of unfair competition. Another issue that has become very interesting when it comes talking about threshold standards from a European perspective, it's exactly the question of the monopolies. Monopolies in general, which monopolies, I'm talking about, of course, alcohol monopolies, which in various countries in Europe have pertained. They are fully accepted, tolerated for reasons of public health, like the alcohol or the Systembolaget in Finland and Sweden. The European Court of Justice has said for many years that that kind of monopolies, on the name of public health, they are fully acceptable on the name of, provided that principles like the principle of proportionality, the principle of non-discrimination are observed. So you may have different mechanisms that were, let's say, were created for one purpose, which might be used more or less efficiently in order to also serve this new objective, which is sustainability. And this is what's happening. Talking about environmental sustainability or social sustainability, it might be an interesting, let's say, tool that could help in terms of common understanding, in terms of dialogue, could help wineries to move forward a more sustainable, let's say, production in terms of environmental sustainability, or even in order to better observe criteria, standards when it comes to social sustainability, like workers' rights and human rights. So that is a good purpose, and I believe that in principle that could be easily accepted. However, when it comes to the way that this can or cannot be applied, things may become a little bit more tricky, especially in the case that there aren't any rules when you're talking about procedural rules, about how you pick up wines, about thresholds, about knowing in advance what are the purpose, what are the standards, and of course, if there are any audits, how they are organized, and so on. So this is just to say that when it comes, given the specific environment in the EU and the different layers of regulation and the different operators that may intervene, asking for sustainability is one thing, the way you move forward is another, and it could be sometimes more difficult to obtain. Time flies. I have 3 minutes, and I would like to now move to something else, talking about other tools that may be used, that are used in this complex environment, legal environment of the EU, which is the system of geographical indications, designations of origin, and geographical indications for wines, which, as you know, is a critical issue. We still make wine in Europe basically through the system, and by communicating and by governing and developing the European vineyard and the European wine sector through the system of geographical indications. Well, here you have what I was saying earlier, the collective identity. You may have organizations of producers that may organize the local management of the vineyard and of the wine sector in a more sustainable way. I take the example of Champagne, where you have the weight for bottles, the maximum weight that has been regulated. You have restrictions to the use of weed killers, about waste management, and so on. But it may go even one step further, which is, for instance, the case since last year, the case of Patrimonio, which is a geographical indication for wines in Corsica, where sustainability is not simply presented as a tool with some kind of incentives to go towards that direction, but it has become really a part of the identity and even a legal condition in order to use the protected name. In other words, in the product specification of the wine of Patrimonio, which is a geographical indication for wines in this specific region of Corsica, the chemical weed killers are explicitly prohibited if someone, in other words, wants to continue using the protected name and the added value that goes together, is obliged to be sustainable, at least in part, for this part that is mentioned in the product specification. But of course, these are just small examples at the local level. At the general level, talking about common rules, horizontal rules about sustainability, we have various ways to move forward in order towards more sustainability in the wine sector. Recycling and reuse. I'm not going to spend more time on these examples about pesticides, about nutrient losses, about management of water, and even about resistant new varieties, which have appeared in the European legal system for wines with a geographical indication. The example of Voltis, which is a new grape variety that it's the product of a laboratory of a scientific process and that has started being planted in Champagne. It's a good example in this sense. But what is coming with these horizontal binding rules, it's even more interesting and even more intriguing. For instance, the draft regulation on recycling that fixes by 2030, among other, the objective that packaging shall only be placed on the market or if it complies with the regulation. We will not accept any more additional layers of packaging, no double bottom bottles, despite any kind of three-dimensional trademarks. We saw the same thing with plain packaging for tobacco products. We have the minimization of packaging. Any packaging that it's not strictly necessary will be prohibited. And this will not only concern European operators, but also operators from third countries, wines from third countries that are imported in the EU. The draft directive of due diligence, and this is my last point, which has been last week, has moved forward. It is in the decision-making process, and it's likely to be adopted by next year. That fixes environmental and social sustainability as objectives to be attained, to be served by business operators. The standards are fixed with reference to international instruments like the Paris Agreement for Climate Change or various instruments when it comes to the protection of human rights at the level of social sustainability. EU companies and non-EU companies with specific criteria like the number of employees, the turnover, and the sector of activities are those that are concerned. Of course, bigger actors at the beginning are those that are concerned. But in fact, given that wine, it is an activity of high impact, even medium-sized, let's say, wineries or in the sector of spirit drinks are likely to be concerned. And you have specific obligations, including the recognition of a duty of care of the management of these undertakings, and of course, civil liability if those criteria are not set. So the last question is, we all share the same concern about sustainability, whether in the US, in Canada, in Asia, or in Europe. But we do not necessarily share the same standards, and I would say even less, the same pathways in order to achieve this objective. We have a certification on a volunteer basis, we saw that, but we may also have full compliance to specific patterns, to binding rules. So if there is some kind of diverging, and probably there are still very diverging points about what is sustainable. If you have one country or one region that asks for wines to be sustainable, whereas the criteria are not the same or equivalent in the country of origin, then we have problems, we have obstacles, we have barriers, new technical barriers to trade, which is likely to be an important issue, a big issue and a problem for sustainability as an objective. And this is probably the only way of managing to deal with this. It's discussion either between stakeholders or between governments. Thank you very much for this, and I'm at your disposal for any kind of questions and comments. I tried to wrap it up in 15 minutes, but there's still a lot to be said. Thank you, Tracy. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Georgopoulos. Does anyone have any questions? I see some questions that I'm still going to wait till the end so that we can ask all panelists. Professor Georgopoulos, you did say that, you know, when we have a divergence between, let's say, a public monopoly and a wine growing region certification program, I mean, what do you think the proper role of these public authorities, especially those who are engaged in the retail sale of alcohol, should be when it comes to you know, trying to kind of impose their particular values around sustainability upon a given wine region? You mentioned it a little bit, but I wondered if you could just elaborate in terms of what their role really should be in your mind.
Let me say that everybody would agree that sustainability, it is a claim that it's fully honorable, and we all need to go that way. So that is one thing for certain. But I would say that the objective does not always justify any kind of means. I believe that a question of common understanding, going hand by hand, instead of just cutting bridges and saying, here is a threshold, either you reach it or I don't care. I don't think it could lead, either it will cost money, it will disrupt markets, it will cause frustration. And in fact, I believe that on the long run, it will not even serve the purpose of sustainability. I'm not trying to be romantic. On the contrary, I try to be realistic. I believe that this going hand by hand, trying to find common understanding. Is it going to be equivalence? Is it going to be transitional periods? Is it going to be step by step? It's going to be, I don't really know. And of course, the discussion is open. But I do believe that there is no, let's say, magic solution, but it has to be somewhere there in the discussion, in the common understanding.
Thank you very much, Theo. That was a very thorough answer. I appreciate it. And now, last but certainly not least, it's really the person we've been waiting for here on the panel, because we know he has so much to add to this conversation, really about, you know, we as suppliers, you know, wanting to work toward common goals that our retailer partners have in terms of sustainability. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George Saleas, who's the president and CEO of LCBO. Thank you so much for being here, George. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're all doing well. We've just listened to some incredibly informative and substantive presentations. I've definitely learned a lot, really great information to take away. So as Tracy said, I'm George Saleas. I'm the president and CEO of the LCBO. They used to call us the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. We're not really controlling anyone right now, so we're just the LCBO. Thank you for inviting me to speak today at the third Transatlantic Symposium on Wine Law and Policy. It's really an honor to be here with you. And I'm looking forward to sharing more information about the work that we do here at the LCBO for the people of our province, and specifically about our Spirit of Sustainability Social Impact platform, of which I am very particularly proud of. Before I get into that, I just want to give you a very brief introduction of who I am and my background at the LCBO, as well as an overview of the LCBO and the Ontario marketplace, because I'm assuming that some of you don't know as much about us, and many probably know a lot. So let's get started. I joined the organization 25 years ago. It's hard to believe that it's since 1997 as a director of quality assurance after serving more than 11 years the Canadian wine industry. Looking further back to when I was studying at the University of Toronto, I did my PhD thesis really studying the biochemistry and the chemistry of wine and alcohol. And this is a space that really has always been a passion of mine. The LCBO has been an amazing place to grow my career. And we say to our people here and to our new candidates that there is a world of opportunities at the LCBO, and I have truly discovered that firsthand myself. And I've held a number of different positions across the organization, and I've been the president and CEO of the LCBO since 2016. So as I said, my career has been anything but a straight line within the organization. So I've served at every corner of the organization. And I'm also currently serving as a member of the board of directors of the Retail Council of Canada, which represents about 30,000 retailers in our country here in Canada. Now, turning over to the Ontario and the Canadian alcohol landscape, just to give you an idea of who we are and how we operate across Canada, there are different models for how beverage alcohol is sold. Just 10 provinces, 3 territories, and the sales are through either provincially run or private retailers, or a mix of both. The LCBO does not, as I mentioned before, regulate beverage alcohol in Ontario. We have what is called the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, the AGCO, which is really the provincial regulatory agency that is responsible for regulating the alcohol, gaming, horse racing, and cannabis retail stores or sectors. The AGCO administers the Liquor License and Control Acts, which is legislation here in Ontario. So we are a provincially government-owned corporation. We act as both a retailer and a wholesaler. Our marketplace is evolving with our current government, which is committed to delivering more choice and convenience to consumers. So the LCBO is the only retailer that is authorized to sell wine, beer, cider, and spirits in Ontario. We have approximately 680 retail stores across the province, and also meet customers through our e-commerce platform and also our mobile app. In our 2021-22 fiscal year, we had net sales that exceeded $7 billion. But we'll take a closer look at our financials in just a moment. In terms of the sales channels, while we are the only retailer authorized to sell wine, beer, cider, and spirits in Ontario, we're really not a true monopoly in our marketplace. I always say that we're sort of a quasi-monopoly. In addition to serving customers directly through our retail network and our e-commerce platform, we also serve 450 grocery stores across the province that sell a mix of beer, cider, and many of them wine as well. There's another private monopoly. It's called the Beer Store, which sells beer and cider only. And it's retailing 24 bottle cases of beer, which we can't. And it operates approximately 440 stores. We are fortunate that Ontario also has a rich wine and beer industry, which includes 532 winery retail stores and another 367 on-site brewery stores. And finally, our wholesale channel encompasses licensees such as restaurants and bars, duty-free, and over 390 LCBO convenience outlet stores, which are privately run business authorized to sell beverage alcohol in smaller towns that may not have convenient access to an LCBO, and that includes spirits as well. In terms of the LCBO market share, to give you a sense of our market share outside of spirits, which, as you can see, we own 100%. We currently own about 83.5% for wines and 32.2% beer sales, and really just over half of the total market share in Ontario. So as you can see, the LCBO dominates wine sales in Ontario. Just financials. I'd like to offer some insight on the LCBO's 21-22 fiscal year. As I mentioned, the LCBO finished our fiscal 22 year, which was last year. This is fiscal 23, and in a pretty strong position with sales of $7.34 billion as one of the, if not the largest, one of the largest retailers and wholesalers of beverage alcohol in the world. We are committed to going above and beyond to make meaningful contributions to the government of Ontario. So we were very proud, and we were able to return $2.55 billion dividend to the province, which that doesn't include the taxes, by the way, which supports critical government services. A lot of that money goes to healthcare, education, and infrastructure for the province of Ontario. I also want to call out our licensee sales. It's consisting of bars and restaurants, as they were hardest hit during the pandemic and were forced to close at different points in the year. So we're happy to see that these sales are really bouncing back in full force, almost to pre-pandemic numbers, which is great to see. And our e-commerce sales were also steady at about $140 million as consumers began to return to in-store shopping. So let's now move on to our social impact platform, what we call here at the LCBO the spirit of sustainability. Social responsibility has been at the core of the LCBO's mandate for over 95 years, since really our conception. We're celebrating 95 years this year. In 2018, we started the journey of developing a social impact platform to evolve around our understanding of social responsibility and its inevitability that led us to our sustainability platform. What does sustainability mean for us here at the LCBO? Well, it brings together both social and environmental needs. And while we're not a producer of our products, we're not a manufacturer, we take our business environmental impact seriously and have taken steps to tackle and address the issues of a retailer and a wholesaler while setting goals for the future. We really strive to be a purpose-led organization, and this is actioned through our enterprise-wide social impact platform. It's called the Spirit of Sustainability, which allows us to drive meaningful and equitable change in our communities, all 300 communities that we operate in Ontario, and that's all for the good of these communities and for the province. Now, our programs and partnerships support both social and environmental needs, with the ultimate goal of creating a more sustainable province. We also want to empower the beverage alcohol industry to promote inclusive social and environmental practices and to share knowledge to advance sustainability. In fact, shortly after launching the platform and due to its impact, our government mandate actually evolved to include help shape a more sustainable Ontario. So we set the agenda, really, establishing sustainability as a mandate and a strategic priority for our organization. We continuously evaluate and evolve the platform and its policies and the programs to deliver on our commitment and respond to growing needs and trends. This led us on an exploration on how we could further embed social impact into our business practices. The spirit of sustainability has a three-pillar approach that includes clear commitments and key performance indicators that guide our actions. We call that the 3 Ps. They're a little bit different than the 3 Ps that were mentioned before, is that the good people, good planet, and good partnerships. And we feel that if you can get those 3 Ps right, the fourth one, which is the profit, it will happen. And through our good planet pillar, we advance practices that reduce energy consumption and waste generated by our business operations, including our retail stores, our warehouse operations, and also our product offerings. We also focus on responsible supply chains, where we establish environmentally conscious standards across the production, transportation, and distribution of our products, including the contracts that we sign with freight forwarders and other transportation partners that we have. As a retailer and a wholesaler, it is through good partners and good planet we can achieve the types of environmental partnerships and these green initiatives that support us moving forward and doing good on the communities and the commitments that I mentioned before. So I want to spend a little time driving into each pillar, starting off with our good people pillar. As our customers and employees and the communities are our top priority, we have 3 main commitments under good people to help improve their health and well-being. Our moderation mandate provides products, it provides information, and the responsible services Ontarians need to make positive drinking choices that support a healthy lifestyle. And as part of this, our quality assurance experts here at the LCBO, at our LCBO Quality Assurance Laboratory, are committed to bring in Ontario only the best in quality and innovation. We are the only legal jurisdiction in the world that basically chemically tests and authenticates and reviews the labels and tastes every product that we sell. In fact, our lab standards are used as a benchmark by other Canadian legal jurisdictions as well as international legal jurisdictions, including the European Food Safety Agency, some of the associations that we work with in the United States and Canada and elsewhere, to set standards or to avoid crises. We are committed to building communities where everyone has equitable access to the essential resources they need to live happy, healthy lives, regardless of gender, age, sex, race, class, religion, ethnicity, ability, the language, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And we're very proud of that. And to support this, we strategically partner with charitable organizations throughout the year that have a strong track record of driving meaningful community impact across Ontario's diverse communities. And finally, our employees play a very important role in over 680 stores and across 300 communities, as I mentioned before, in Ontario. And that's why we are committed to empowering them to achieve and exceed their goals, supporting their mental and physical health, and connecting them with our mission and values. And I can tell you that they're very passionate about that. Now, through our Good Planet pillar, another pillar, we are committed to minimizing our impact on the environment. And this includes prioritizing waste and energy reduction, and advancing practices that reduce the energy used and waste generated by our business operations and product offerings. We encourage responsible supply chains. We continue to innovate to establish environmentally conscious standards across the production, the transportation, and distribution of products. And under this pillar is a program I'm very proud of, our lightweight glass bottle program, what is called the Canada Bottle today, which has had national and international environmental influence. In fact, since the program launched a decade ago, we have reduced our annual waste by more than 6 million kilograms. And in fact, our Ontario Deposit Return Program is now almost at 80% return. And if we look at the blue box, it actually brings us into the low 90% return of these bottles. Wineries have also adopted lighter bottles to supply the LCBO, and other jurisdictions have followed our lead, introducing the policy into their business models. Just a week ago, we announced our intention to phasing out single-use paper bags at all LCBO stores over the coming months. I would say within the next 3 to 4 months, they will be totally eliminated. So this comes 15 years after we were an early leader in removing single-use plastic bags, which back then was a very bold move. Now, given our size and number of stores across the province, the reduction in our impact will be massive in almost everything we do. So eliminating single-use paper bags will remove approximately 135 million paper bags annually from the LCBO retail stores. So that would divert almost 2,700 tons of waste from landfill, and it will save the equivalent of more than 188,000 trees a year. And to us, that's very important. That's significant. And finally, our good partner pillar focuses on leading by example and teaming up with, as I mentioned before, like-minded partners to foster real positive change in our industry. We are committed to influencing industry standards and encouraging the beverage alcohol industry, our partners, to be more environmentally and socially conscious. Our supplier code of conduct, which we've released almost a year ago, ensures that, and we've renewed and released, ensures we will not compromise on this commitment and will only work with suppliers dedicated to doing the same. We also celebrate trade partners and suppliers doing amazing work to promote diversity and inclusion and community investment and sound environmental practices. This includes spotlighting the LCBO's great partners in our annual Pride campaign coming up soon in June. And finally, the LCBO is proud to utilize our resources to increase opportunities for diversity in the beverage alcohol industry. As part of this commitment, we've launched the Spirit of Inclusion initiative. So this program is designed to create opportunities for diverse women to enter, advance, and thrive in the beverage alcohol industry. So working with our impact partners, our goal is to increase equitable representation in the winery, brewery, and distillery fields. So here's a very high-level look at our Spirit of Sustainability Impact report in action. With the help of our generous customers, we raised over $16.7 million in charitable funds last year to support the health and well-being of Ontarians. And that includes Children's Hospital Foundations, Women's College Foundations, United Way, and many other partners that we have, or we feel that this money will definitely help. And with almost 700,000 tests performed, The LCBO lab is a national leader in product safety, innovation, and quality assurance. In fact, I always say that our lab should be in the Guinness Book of Records because I don't think that anyone has the database that we have, which is so useful so many times. And finally, we diverted 81% of our retail service center waste from landfills in 2021. So you can find more about our Spirit of Sustainability Impact report and the initiatives in our most recent 21-22 impact report, which is found on our lcbo.com, and I invite you to do that. So just to finish, ending on that very positive note, I'd like to again thank you, Theodore and Tracy, for inviting me, and thank you to everybody else for listening to me. I hope this presentation was helpful and gave you a better sense of the LCBO and our Spirit of Sustainability Social Impact platform. We're very proud of it. And I always say that we're not done and we will never be done because this is continuous improvement. So thank you. Great presentations today, by the way. Enjoyed them very much.
Thank you, George. Really appreciated that presentation. And we really applaud, as you know, your commitment to people, planet, and partners. It's tremendous. I think, you're a model for others. And now we only have a few minutes. We're going to have to go over to actually get to these questions. So I would say those questions that we don't get to, we can email you answers. And those people who have to jump off the call, please feel free to contact us at the Wine Institute for any further consultation on this matter. So let me just jump really quickly into the first question here. So the question is, sustainability seems to be a moving target. Climate change outcomes and impacts are constantly changing, usually more harshly. Global economies control the money and resources that can be spent on sustainability and projects and practices. Trade conflicts may undercut sustainable practices through fake or counterfeit claims. How do each of you and your entities attack the moving target dilemma? George, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, for sure, yes. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. We really don't want to get out there and provide fixed guidelines for our suppliers. We want to work in a collaborative way with others on overall standards. And I'm really happy. We're watching FIVs very closely for what they're doing to make sure that we learn and we collaborate to set some kind of a standard for all those products that are entering our stores. We strengthen our supplier code of conduct, as I mentioned, which applies to legislation and regulations. But we believe that the LCBO suppliers should aspire beyond simply complying with the local laws, but they should endeavor to meet the global standards and the global conventions without us having to force them, really.
Thank you, George. Next question. Do the presenters feel that an overall standard for sustainability that includes environmental, social, and economic requirements will be beneficial and should be established so that producers can certify to all the same conditions and requirements? I'm thinking something like SQF or an ISO standard that would be international rather than the various independent programs that are available state and region wide. Laura, do you want to try that one? And then Allison?
Sure. Look, this one's a tricky one. I mean, I would say personally, if there was one standard out there which could certify everyone to for sustainability, and that would adequately take into account all the economic, social, and environmental specificities of every region. I mean, that would be great, wouldn't it be? We could really do, but the reality is very different. I feel like wine, due to its nature, so specific. I personally, I'm not sure we can really get there. And that's why FIPS has taken the approach of a framework where we have the major, kind of issues you need to be tackling, but then we kind of leave the specificities and how you implement that to these local, standards and programs, which are really on the field and who know what's happening and who actually will be better able to really reflect what sustainability is than just, a global, maybe, certification standard, which might not actually be that close to, which might be closer maybe to something like greenwashing than real sustainability. But Allison,
And George as well. Allison and
Yeah.
George.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Look, as I said before, we don't want to set standards and guidelines that are not achievable by suppliers. We want to work with suppliers to set up standards that are achievable and together gradually raise the bar for these suppliers to come into the market and for the customers to understand what we're doing. If we set standards that are not achievable, either people will cheat or they're just not going to help us to bring these products into the market. So collaborating and perhaps having really good sustainability certification programs in the origin of the product would definitely help us. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to promote the certifications of California, of Germany, of France, of the European Union in our stores and educate our consumers, our customers, to understand what they mean. And it may be different from Chile versus Argentina versus California and so on and so forth, but at least there is a certification that is trusted because it is issued by an authentic, trusted organization. So it's a matter of A, doing that, and B, educating our own people and our own customers to understand what it means. It's going to be very difficult to have one global standard because of the global supply chain issues that we have and because of the climatic differences that we have around the world.
Indeed. Allison, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree fully with what they both said. And the only thing that I would add maybe is the challenge of all of the differences in international laws and regulations. And to Laura's point, sometimes those are addressing the very issues that retailers and consumers care about. And so we have to figure out a way to take into account those as well as all the local conditions and regions. And that's why I think having one single standard could be really challenging. But there's a role for benchmarking, for understanding what retailers, consumers want, and what industry is already, how they're already working to achieve those goals. I think we have a very common framework to work within. It's just a matter of really trying to improve understanding and communication about it.
Thank you. Theo, do you have any thoughts about how when standards that are coming in from another country, national standards, bump up against legal prohibitions in the state that the wine region is operating in, or there's tension between the legal prohibitions and, let's say, a monopolies, decision that they must be in place in order to get to a certain level of certification?
Depends on how you deal with the matter. George was saying, and it was a full answer to the question I was asking during my presentation. He said, "Let's do it through common understanding," and he also added, "We educate our people." And I think that this is very interesting. If you go the hard way by fixing thresholds and saying, "Come and reach them," this is likely, as I was saying, this is likely to be very, very problematic. As you said, there aren't any common standards. If you try to fix common standards by necessarily, that would be the minimum denominator, which means actually that probably would not be much, or all would be greenwashing or distortion to competition. So I do believe that, of course, as Laura said, that would be, it's very seducing thinking about this. But since this cannot be done, yes, having, for instance, let to go the hard way and delisting some wines if they are not sustainable according to the threshold that is set in a unilateral way by any kind of governmental, semi-governmental or private authority, putting someone out of the market. Apart from the legal questions as such, the technical legal questions that this raises, it is also, someone may ask, is this really helping sustainability on the long run?
Can I add to that?
Yes.
I think that if we educate the consumers to understand sustainability and our own people, then the customers will vote with their wallets, and it will force competition and will force those that are not participants to get on board. So there is really no need to reject these products or to delist these products, but rather to set the bar incrementally higher and higher for everybody to get on board. And I must say that as monopolies, our influence is very significant, and this influence comes with accountability. And we can do a lot of things as monopolies. One of the examples that I always use is the lightweight glass bottle standard that we set here at 420 grams, and today has become really a global standard. We did the same when we started testing for pesticide residues many years ago. We've taken the standards that we had here in Canada, and we gradually lower the maximum allowable limits, even significantly lower than those of the Food and Drug Act and regulations, working with the suppliers without really rejecting their products, but working and pushing them to use less and less. Today, 99.8% of the products that we buy have no pesticide residues. It was a very different picture, 15, 20 years ago. So this is what we can achieve together. We can drive the agenda as a very large distributor and buyer. We can influence, but we must do it responsibly. We can't just set guidelines that really set the industry to fail, because we're all going to fail. This is a message that I keep sending to everybody, is that we have a job, we can influence, but we have to do it the right way to achieve. As Theodore said before, I mean, we need to work together.
Absolutely. That is really the only way we're going to evolve in this area. Two more quick questions coming from Europe. I'll make sure I get around the world a bit. How is the EU dealing with the sustainability programs in Europe and around the world? And is FIV's benchmark a tool to use? So I guess that's Theo and Laura.
So we're talking about sustainability programs. There are so many. As I was saying, there are some of private origin or collective private origin or of public origin. So there are many different different sustainability programs, maybe too many. Regarding if they are monitored or not, some of them are and some are not. The idea of moving towards, let's say, legal frameworks with horizontal binding rules is to fix standards, minimum standards, thresholds that are likely to replace to some extent those sustainability schemes that are scattered all around. Some of them being very good, many of them being very good, and some of them being just for greenwashing. Or, despite their good incentives, they are full of holes, allowing either distortions or, in fact, inefficient results.
Laura?
And yeah, to add to that, when it comes to the FIDS benchmark, I mean, this one is always a bit, our approach in Europe is going to first to look at, the programs by our members, because, we feel quite confident in what they're doing. And that's really kind of what we're going to look at first. Then due to the nature of FIDS, we're an association. It's not really our role to go out and then point our finger and say, oh, you're not living up to our benchmark, we're going to exclude you. And we can't really do that. And imagine that would be even more so one of our members. It would be problematic. So really what it is, it's kind of look at these programs and try to see if there are gaps, then, try and help. As George was saying, it's about working together collaboratively, trying to point this out to be like, look, we need to move forward on these issues to try and bring them to, some sort of minimum standard where we feel they're representative of the wine industry.
And I think maybe also where the question was going is, if an entity were to join FIVS, are these benchmarking standards that you're putting in place, or this consensus around benchmarking, could ultimately be a tool to use, that is used within Europe and other countries, just in terms of, at least evaluating programs?
Again,
Potentially.
so this, yeah, again, this is a tricky one for us due to our nature. We work on consensus, so it's all about communication, collaboration. But it is what we're trying to do is really kind of, it's true, try to have this common understanding and maybe minimum standard of what sustainability is to then help us go and talk to the retailers, understand where maybe there's issues, where we need to improve. We're definitely not getting the certification business. That's not what we
Right.
do.
Sure.
But we do kind of want to have a common voice to really move the discussion forward and to help our members. Really, because one thing I think where we have been lacking is in communication, effective communication with consumers, retailers, to say what's already in place.
Thank you, Laura. And this is the final question. Oh, Allison. No,
I just
Allison.
wanted to really quickly mention one thing about FIVs is it is so collaborative in nature. I think by virtue of doing the benchmarking, we can see where those gaps are and we can work together with other programs that maybe are covering them more effectively or areas where we need to work together. And one great example was years ago, back in 2007, I think we published the first international greenhouse gas protocol so that we were all looking at climate change and measuring our carbon footprint. But let's do that in a similar way and a cohesive way. And so we work together with contractors to work on that project. So there's all kinds of opportunities where the international wine industry can work together.
Wonderful. Last question, Theo, and then we're closing. About GIs in Europe. If they require bottling of wine at the place where it was made, and particularly if the GI requires bottling in a specific type of bottle, then if that wine is traded, the GI requires it to be shipped in heavy glass bottles. This is for you, George, too. Is there any movement to adapt GIs to sustainability and reduction of CO2 emissions by allowing shipment of GI wine in bulk? And I know this affects you, George, as well. So to the two of
Well,
you.
that is a tricky and very interesting question. The answer is that in the draft regulation about recycling, that's in the pipeline. For now, geographic indications may obtain derogations, meaning that you may have specific kind of bottles that go beyond the minimum threshold, the minimum requirements, but still in the name of the specific identity of the geographical indications, there can be derogations. But this is for now. I don't think that on the long run that kind of derogations may subsist. I believe that in fact, with the exception of, for instance, exception of technical requirements, for instance, sparkling wine, given the pressure that where you need to have a bigger and more important quantity of glass, I believe that on the long run, the geographical indications themselves will either be under the constraint to take measures in order to become a more, let's say, sustainable in terms of bottling, or in fact, they will be obliged to do so by the market since the consumer will be likely to turn its back to wines that, in the name of identity, are not sustainable. Let me just mention to this, and this is very important, this is where it becomes tricky, is that if this idea, this solution remains, saying that everybody must have glasses that are subject to sustainability criteria, with the exception of geographical indications that are protected in Europe, this is a technical barrier to trade, meaning that any wines from third countries that are not subject to the European system of geographical indications will not have the same, could not benefit from the same derogation. So I don't think that on the long run, that kind of derogations would subsist even for the sacred system of geographical indications. Either the market or law will be likely to take them away.
So, Tracy, we do have standards for lightweight glass bottles for 750 ml as well as 1.5 liters. We did a lot of research as to how we came to those weights a while ago, and that involved breakage rates, it involved the Ministry of Labor standards in terms of lifting and so on and so forth. That's how we came up with that standard. So we started in almost 10 years ago with wines below 1595, and simply because we looked at the 80-20 rule, 80% of the products that we were selling, they were less than 1595. It's now up to 1895. The compliance is incredibly high. It's in the high 90s. So companies are compliant. There are exceptions, sparkling wines and some other products or rare products that we will use logic, obviously, to ensure that we don't miss out in these products, and we work with suppliers to bring them into compliance, as over a period of time. We also have exceptions on buying from source. You mentioned that you talked about shipping wine in bulk and bottling in the place of retailing. We're not convinced that you really save a lot of energy, or you reduce your carbon footprint by doing that. But nevertheless, a few issues that we have with that is, first, we lose the authenticity of the product, the traceability of the product, and when we have a public recall, we have some challenges with that as well. So that's something that is our policy, and I don't see that changing in the near future, to be honest with you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. I want to end with this observation from one of our audience members. What sets apart the LCBO sustainability initiatives is that it was done in collaboration, all caps, with suppliers and partners. This approach resulted in the development of the lightweight bottle as one example. This approach is one that other retailers and associations should consider. Working together, we can drive sustainability efforts further and faster. So on that observation, I want to thank all our panelists. You all did a fantastic job and contributed to this very important dialogue that's going on internationally. And I want to thank the audience for your participation. And again, if you'd like to, we can email you answers to your questions if you'd like to provide us with that information. And we're always open to new suggestions and thoughts for what would be the fourth Transatlantic Legal Symposium. So please stay engaged with us. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank
everyone.
you.
Take care.